The US has issued a threat to China, and it's kind of ridiculous. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has issued a threat to China, basically stating that it's believed that China is trying to help Russia alleviate some of the stresses due to these sanctions. And so it looks as though, the US is kind of like, if you give Russia any safe havens, if you help bail Russia out of this, we're gonna come after you. That was a threat. For me, it's the audacity. It's the audacity. Like, who do you think you are? And I get it. America is the most powerful country in the world. Look, I'm American. I'm here in Washington, D.C. But it's the audacity to think you can go around the world bullying people around the world when you're not innocent yourself. You go invading other countries, but you describe it as, you're liberating them. They invite you there. But when, so I think it's a little bit ridiculous for the US to sort of like try to bully other countries, into, I think it's ridiculous for the US to think it can police the world and try and bully other countries into submission, because essentially that's exactly what Russia is doing to Ukraine, right? They are bullying them, trying to prove their dominance over them. And it's like the US is kind of doing the same thing. So how do you really differentiate yourself from Russia? I mean, obviously, there are many ways that the US is look, freedom of speech, democracy, I believe in all those principles. But because I believe in all those principles, because I believe in freedom, it's kind of like hypocritical to watch the US police the world and sort of like put restrictions on the world. And it's also suggested that China is looking to, Bloomberg reported that that Russia is looking to China for aid, and they're suggesting that there might be some military aid, some like equipment that China might supply to Russia. And and you see, in the past, the whole annexation of Crimea in 2014, China stayed neutral. But it's looking as though, like, look, if China does get involved in this and does supply weapons, this is not a neutrality. China's going to pick a side. But as we know right now, China seems to be staying neutral, But let's also remember that Putin, just before this war, literally like a month or so before the war, when Putin met with President Xi, they had this sort of like declaration that they are friends and what their relationship is limitless. So that's kind of what the fear is, in the international community, is that, is China going to help Russia? And to what capacity is China going to help Russia? And as we're seeing, all these U.S. companies, all these U.S. media, all the U.S. presence that is against Russia, and the world sort of like turns against Russia, and the world that's afraid of the U.S. Is turning against Russia. The real deciding factor is, what is China going to do? Because here's the thing about the Chinese, and I've talked about this in a few videos, but the Chinese want to be the most powerful country in the world, and finances are very important in them achieving that. Money is a very important tool in them achieving that. And so if the U.S. does turn against China, if the U.S. decides, look, China's helping Russia, not just the U.S., but the Western world, if they decide, look, China's helping Russia, they can sanction China. And China's not going to want that. Trust and believe, China is not going to want that. President Xi's priority is to make China the richest country in the world, and for China to rule the world. That's the goal for, China. So it's not in his vision for other countries to start placing sanctions on China, because what will happen is you're going to see all these European countries start placing sanctions on China, even though we know that a lot of these countries need China for manufactured goods. China's a very big superpower, but a big giant like the US threatening China can be quite problematic. And I don't think it's the smartest move for the US either, because China is so powerful around the world, and people around the world or countries around the world depend on China, that it's going to be tough now. It's going to be the West against the East, and people are just not going to take sides. So this threat is pretty courageous of the US. I feel like the US thinks it's the same superpower that it was 20 years ago, and that's not it. You know, we see the example with these sanctions, placing all these sanctions on Russia, because the U.S., especially with the oil sanction, well, you know, the U.S. like bans Russian oil. The U.S. can afford to do that because it has its own oil and enough oil to even export oil out, right? But these European countries are dependent on Russia, so they can't do that. They're not in the position to do that. And so, like, it just proved that, look, as powerful as you are, the U.S. is, you're not as powerful without the West, and the West cannot be united with you in this, you know. So the thing is now, when it's then Russia and China against the U.S., that makes it more complex because other countries in the world depend on China. And if we're talking about Africa, Africa depends on China. Africa is not going to let go of China. Africa is not going, and let's talk about the fact that Europe is looking to Africa to supply some of its oil needs, oil and gas needs, because of and America is also looking to Saudi and all these other countries to supply its. So it's looking to its former sort of like, I don't want to call them enemies, but Venezuela is like a sort of like was sanctioned. Iran was sanctioned. So these are the countries that the U.S. is looking to for to support Europe's oil and gas needs, to replace Russia. But the point is, if the U.S. goes against China and then decides, okay, we're going to sanction China, and then Europe follows suit, then you're going to create a divide. It's going to be East versus West, and the rest of the world is going to look like, hey, we're not taking sides anymore. And it actually is going to give Russia more power. Now, the thing is that China has no incentive to support Russia, or nothing that we know of. There's no reason for China to just go out and support Russia. But I think what is annoying is the audacity of the US to make a threat to China. I think that is what could piss them off, but I don't think that I think that the Chinese are smart enough to navigate this peacefully and intelligently. But I think it's the audacity to make that threat as though the US thinks it's the superpower that it was 20 years ago. Don't get me wrong, still a superpower, but you're not what you were 20 years ago. You're not dominating this world. And now China's a big player. China is equal to the US right now. So you sort of like waving your hand and like saying, don't you dare, China. It's giving white supremacy. It's giving white supremacy, right? And I think the world is looking at that like, whoa, what's China going to do? What is China going to do? Because you're not about to, because China gives the US the same energy. It's a very combative relationship in terms of, it's very like a toxic back and forth rivalry, right? They're like frenemies. So I know the Chinese are going to give a rebuttal, which is going to be very interesting. I think it's very important that the Chinese at least state that you're not going to tell us what we're going to do. Just as the Finland was, even though in Finland, they know that they cannot battle Russia's military. They know they stand no chance. But the president of Finland is still out there saying that Putin thinks he can determine how we rule our countries, and he has no power in doing that. So we're going to stand for what we believe in. So I think that's the message China needs to send to America, that look, we're going to do whatever we want to do. This is not your business what we do. And that's that. But then still not support Russia. I think it's very important that China doesn't support Russia, because it's going to really affect their economy, because we're going to see a lot of sanctions. And I'm surprised. Well, I don't even want to talk about 2020, but you know what happened in 2020. And I'm surprised there were no sanctions that happened there. But let's just say that maybe that's what the US has against China, that we're going to use this as a tool to attack you for 2020. Maybe that's what it is, because I made a whole documentary breaking down what happened. It's called A New Era. Go check it out on streamovg.com. I broke down the inception of, it's like a timeline of how it spread and who are the key players in allowing it to spread. Go check that out. Streamovg.com. Some of my content, I can't put it out on the internet. I can't put it on YouTube. I can't put it on, TikTok. I can't put it on Instagram. Some of this stuff will get taken down because of the propaganda. Because of the propaganda that the Western controlled media wants you to believe. So I have my own streaming company. If you guys want to go see it and want to know the real truth, right? Obviously, how I tell stories. I don't take sides. I just present the facts. And I get great interviews. Like, if you like these videos, my documentaries are just way better crafted, way better put together than these videos. So guys, go check it out, streamovg.com. It's called A New Era, and it's in my Africa collection. Go check that out. Break down China's involvement in 2020. You know what happened in 2020. I don't want to say the word because of I don't want to get demonetized or whatever. So maybe that's what China is holding. Maybe that's what the U.S. is holding against China. We're going to take all this stuff. We're going to use our propaganda. The U.S. has shown through this war that it rules global propaganda, right? Global media. With Russia banning Facebook. People love to not report this properly, but Russia banned Facebook. Russia banned all these Google and all these companies. But more importantly, more U.S. companies have withdrawn from Russia. So many. It's ridiculous. I think it's in the hundreds have withdrawn from Russia. These media companies didn't need to do this, but they did this to stand with the U.S. It shows that there's a clear division, and the U.S. has a monopoly on global media. So all these U.S. companies, all these U.S. Media outlets that have supported the Western perspective. And that's how you guys are getting brainwashed, because you don't understand the full 360 perspective. And I think for me, I'm not taking sides. I want to see both sides, what's happening on both sides. Yes, there's corruption going on in Russia, immense corruption, but let's not neglect the corruption that's also going on in the West. And this global monopoly on media is a corruption. And I'm going to break that down. I have another video on Stream OVG. I'm going to break down media propaganda and how it is so detrimental. The U.S.'s propaganda war. But either way, the U.S. has shown that it might not be the superpower in the sense of what it was then, influential, because everybody sees through white supremacy. Everyone is standing on their own 2 feet. I mean, in Jamaica, they just told Prince William that he has to pay for his own trip, because normally, when they go on these trips in the Commonwealth, they would pay for that. But there's now this black pride globally, right? That is yo, you pay for your own stuff. We're not gonna pay for you. You're already you've already robbed us. The British Empire has already robbed the world, right? Extracted from the world for generations, and now you still want to come and have a vacation for free? No, you pay for your vacation. So that's kind of the energy the world is having towards the West. It's now we have our voice. We've allowed we've gone through imperialism. We've allowed you abuse us. We've allowed all these things happen. Not just Africa, not just the Caribbean, in India, all these countries. We've allowed you to abuse us, and now, no, we're not taking it anymore. And so for the U.S. to sort of scold China in this way, it's going to be very interesting seeing how China responds to it. It's obviously going to be some sort of rebuttal, don't tell us what to do. But I don't think China is stupid enough to go support Russia. Just because China doesn't want to get involved when it doesn't need to. I mean, I saw a lot of Chinese people on Twitter are basically saying please, because the Russians were saying we're friends with China. The Chinese are please, don't say we're friends. We're not friends. They're trying to take that back. And there's suggestions that President Xi knew what Putin was going to do. That's what the US is accusing, that he knew, but they don't think he knew to the full extent. And let's also like realize that the Olympics in Beijing, they waited days after the Olympics in Beijing to end for this invasion to start. And remember, Putin and President Xi met just over a month ago. So there's suggestions that he knew something was going to go on. Maybe he didn't know the details, but he knew something. And he's kind of like, I wouldn't be surprised if he's secretly supporting Russia. But at the same time, it's like the same way that the US is supporting Ukraine, you know? And I get it. People are fighting for democracy, and I believe in democracy. I believe that democracy should rule the world, or at least freedom of speech and all of that. But it's like it's almost like a double standard. Like the US is supporting Ukraine by providing military aid and all this stuff. And so why can't Russia get support elsewhere? And also Russia is accusing the US of like chemical, it's a serious accusation, like the US and Ukraine of developing biological warfare weapons, chemical warfare weapons, chemical weapons. These are serious allegations that they're, claiming that that's what they've been developing. And so for me, what's interesting to me is that the US can go around policing the world and scolding the world, but you don't when it's your turn and when people call you out on stuff, you just kind of like, you're like, no, you can't blame me. Ultimately, look, I support freedom. The fact that I can even sit here and speak my mind in Washington, D.C. in the US, and I'm free to do that, that on its own makes me support at least democracy and freedom of speech, right? But when I think about China and what China does to its journalists, when I think about Russia and what they're doing to their journalists, when I think about that, well, yeah, the U.S. is fighting for the greater good, but that greater good is I don't know. That greater good is not for everyone. And it's not for everyone. It's not for people that don't believe in the same U.S. ideals. It's not for people that... It is for people in general, but it's more so for you if you're white. It prefers white people. And so these are the things that make it... You just have to just look at what the U.S. is doing. Hold it accountable also. How it's trying to navigate the world and determine how people move in the world. We have to look at the U.S. We have to question what the U.S. is really doing. But at the end of the day, ultimately, that's why it's probably as powerful as it is, because it doesn't silence people. It doesn't, it's not fueled by bigotry, even though Donald Trump is trying to run for a re-election and probably create some sort of authoritarian type government, God forbid. That's what he's trying to do. But when it comes to democracy, it's about letting people speak their mind and letting us be opposed, within the U.S., letting us be free to speak our minds, state our opinions. And then at the end of the day, we're still going to come together because of it allows us the freedom of speech. But in Russia, it's like, if I came on Russian TV and I said anything against the propaganda in Russia, I'd probably be in jail for the rest of my life. It's ridiculous. I think it's really sad because I've never been to Russia and I wanted to visit. I guess now I can never go. But it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So that's why I can't support what's going on in Russia. As much as like I could see the U.S. is messed up, at least I can sit here and talk and speak against the United States as a citizen in the nation's capital. But you can't do that in Russia. That on its own tells me there's something wrong there. You can't do that in Russia. You can't do that in China. So is it okay that the U.S. is like policing the world when it allows freedom, when it stands for freedom? What are your opinions? Leave a comment down below. Let me know. Because at the same time, yes, the U.S. invades country. The U.S. strips people of their freedom, exploits countries. Yes, absolutely. So let me know your opinion. Let me know your thoughts. And what do you think about China, the U.S. like waving its finger at China, trying to scold China in this. You think the U.S. should mind, or the international community, do you think that they should mind their business when it comes to China? Do you think that they should like back off and let China do whatever it wants to do? Is it a bad thing for China to supply weapons to Russia? I mean, is it a bad thing? You know, we're hearing that Russian weapons are not powerful. Even India canceled their weapon orders from Russia, because like we are just seeing from this war that the weapons are not strong, and India was like one of the major buyers in Russian weapons. And so is Putin going to need some support from the Chinese? And if the Chinese supports Russia in providing weapons, should they be sanctioned? Crazy. It's all crazy. It's all crazy. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. Leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, all the above. My name is Kenim, and see you next time. Peace. Don't forget to follow streamovg.com.